do you have standards in your relationships? And I'm not talking about a one-way standard, or rather the double standard. I'm talking about, do you have standards that you apply to yourself and you also apply to your significant other? And you both agree to it, that it's sensible, that it's reasonable. Bill Burr, the comedian, he remarked on, there was an interview he did, and he said, my wife, she always, she must be a complete work. She's always talking about what I need to do, what I have to work on. And that's in a lot of relationships. And it's not always the wife, it's not always the woman in the cliche classical relationship. It's oftentimes, it can be anybody. Sometimes guys, they have these double ass standards that they put upon the woman that they're with. And they gaslight them to thinking everything they're doing is wrong. Nothing that they do is wrong. And it's vice versa. It's a two-way street of fuckery. Everybody's guilty of this. But if you're not applying standards to your relationships, then you can't really complain when the communication isn't there, when the harmony isn't there. And I use that word harmony a lot because that's what the fuck we care about. When you listen to a song, you ain't trying to listen to a discordant song, a cacophonous song. Even in movies, there's a flow to it, there's a rhythm. There's something there that seems to have a fluidity to it, and lacking in conflict that is unnecessary. You try to trim the fat as much as possible. These things are works of art, right? And I'm not saying your relationship should mimic art necessarily, but what I'm saying is that there's something that's very compatible with us as humans, something that has to do with this harmony I'm talking about, this consistency, this sensibility. A good song, even if it's no matter how artistic and creative it is, it makes sense. Yeah, you could break it down and you can even explain why it's so beautiful, even if you yourself can't mimic it. A movie, you can break down why it makes sense, why it's so good, if you even want to flex those cognitive muscles to do so. Because the other aspect to this that makes everything so fucking difficult is that we don't want to break anything down. I've been told that when I am met with conflict from some people in my life, that no, you're just going too deep. That's too complex. You are searching for things, and as a result, if you search for them and if you try to get complex, then of course you're going to find something, but that doesn't mean that that something is salient, that something should be considered by me. But I think that's utter bullshit. I think that's mentally lazy. It's similar to the argument as to why we shouldn't be health conscious. It's kind of this thing that we justify. My brother Eric always talks about how we as humans try to find a way to defend our curse, or to defend a curse. And I agree with that. We do try to find a way to justify our shittiness, the things that we do that are destructive, that might hurt each other, that even hurt ourselves. And the goal here is not perfection. Fuck perfection. But the goal instead should be to admit that some of our imperfections are fine, but other imperfections are not. And it's not about being perfect in every way, but it should be about being better in some ways. And we know that being better in some ways is important, it's good, it's healthy. We just want the ones that are convenient. We just want the ones that continue to support our ego, that do not thwart this idea we have of ourselves. But in a healthy environment, when it comes to a relationship, if you establish that, hey, I'm not trying to win. Hey, I don't give a fuck about being better than you. All I want for us to do is to be on the same page. All I want for us is to be teammates and not engage in this thing that, let's just call it friendly fire. Who do we tend to take our aggression out on, our hostility out on the people that are closest to us. Why? Because it's so fucking easy. And why? Because we're cowards. It's okay to admit that you're a coward. It's fine. What's not okay is what you do afterwards. If what you do afterwards is you admit you're a coward and then you just say, fuck it, then we could talk about the problem of that. But I don't think the common person, if they're really honest with themselves, will be okay with that. I don't think the average person, if you really get to a place where you get comfortable with being uncomfortable and you admit, I'm a coward. It's hard for me to face my flaws. It's hard for me to admit that I'm destructive, that I hurt people, that I'm impatient, that I'm intolerant where I should not be, that I'm stressed, and that I'm afraid, and that I'm weak. It's hard for me to admit these things. All right. That's step one. You are on the right motherfucking track. Now, the silver lining, where the rays of sun come in, is when you see that after you admit this, there's options for you. In all likelihood, if you live in a first world civilization, especially with all the luxuries that come along with it, it is so unlikely that you will not have options. Because a lot of the things you can do to become better, to become a more self-aware person, a more communicative person, a lot of those things involve no money at all. A lot of that stuff is just sitting in silence. A lot of that stuff is just having conversations with somebody that you care about that are completely and utterly honest and transparent and wholehearted. And a lot of those conversations, they should be with yourself. And that's another abnormality, another odd thing, something that has this stigma behind it. I swear, I thought everybody talked with themselves. I thought everybody hashed things out within their heart and their soul, and that although they were doing it, they just maybe were doing it poorly, or they were doing it in a way that justified their behavior. But I realized that people aren't doing it at all. People aren't sitting in silence and having conversations with themselves. That's too weird. That's so weird. No, I'll tell you something that's weird. What's weird is that human beings eat the muscle of animals, and then we're freaked out at the idea of eating an organ. Or we're freaked out at the idea of seeing a chicken be killed. That's some weird selective shit. I mean, that's just one example that pops in my head. What I'm saying is that we don't make sense. We don't make sense through and through. So don't act like that doesn't make sense or that's so weird to have a conversation with yourself. It's just weird in the sense that it's not normal. But what's normal isn't necessarily healthy. Isn't necessarily what's best for us. It's just what's normal just equates to what's typically done. Back to the standards. I am speaking to the cliche heterosexual relationship. I apologize for leaving anybody out. But in the classical heterosexual relationship, women tend to think that the man is an emotionless brute, and oftentimes men play up to this stereotype. Men find it very, very uncomfortable to speak their feelings to a woman, because the man, in turn, is stereotyping the woman, thinking to himself, oh, these emotional creatures. They just want to just talk about their feelings. I think the man and the woman are misguided. For one, it is true that women, if I'm not mistaken, tend to be more willing to speak about their feelings. But where women go wrong is that the feeling part is a beautiful thing. But there does need to be also simultaneously an emphasis on logic and reason and rationality at the same time. I am highly emotional. It wasn't until my mid-20s that I began to focus on being more logical and reasonable. And my emotions didn't go anywhere. I'm still emotional as fuck. You see me in my rants. I have my moments. I'm a very passionate individual. But I have to place the spotlight of my attention on rationality, reasonability, sensibility for the sake of building that bridge between me and the other, and for the sake of my own internal stability. And with men, the problem with men is that they pride themselves on being more reasonable, more logical, but they are bullshitters when it comes to acknowledging their actual feelings. Because something else I remember with my brother Eric, it was he was talking about, and it bothered him. And it's true, he's accurate with this. Men want to call women these emotional creatures. Men are sensitive as fuck. Men are super fucking sensitive. I know a lot of sensitive ass men, but they just have a mask over it. They justify it differently, and it manifests itself differently. Men are super emotional as well. They're full of shit. They have feelings, they have emotions, but in the name of masculinity, they try to pass it off as something else, or they try to sweep it under the rug. And that's why a lot of men are tyrants in their homes and assholes to the people around them. And I would call it emotional, just the basics of the kind of stress where in that typical verbally abusive home, when the father is super stressed and has all kinds of things on his plate, and he feels to be the breadwinner, and then he takes it out on his children and he's an asshole to those around him. I would say, hey, you got some emotion build up. You need to do something about that. That's just, you are being highly, you are being a slave to your emotions, and you are being, I would say, you are being a coward in that you're not confronting your emotions of disappointment, your emotions of, or just the sheer stress of it all. It's not cool that you try to grit your teeth and handle stress and pop open a 6-pack, and that's your antidote to the stress you feel, to the anger you feel, the insecurities or whatever, to the feeling of not being appreciated. You need to confront it. You could stand to be more in tune with your emotions. So if a man if he prides himself to be so fucking reasonable, well, I think you need to also be honest with the fact that you need to be more open to the emotions that are flowing through you. And if a woman prides herself from being so in tune with her feelings, she needs to place more emphasis on the logic and the reason. We both have our strengths, we both have our weaknesses, and obviously I'm speaking to stereotypes, and these stereotypes are true in many cases. And so what I'm saying is that we are not fated to be slaves to these stereotypes. I had the typical qualities that you would say a woman has. I was highly emotional, very low logic, and I had to work on being more logic and less, and yeah, quite frankly, less emotional, less reactive, by placing my attention on the sensibility of it all. And it doesn't evaporate your feelings. You don't become a robot. You still have those inclinations. But my point is that there's something you could do about it. Just like people who have a susceptibility to weight gain. It's harder for people. Some people, it's 100% definitely harder for them to lose weight for various reasons. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that it's harder. And so, if we all just admit that we have our strengths, if we all just admit that we also have our weaknesses, and that we are all committed to becoming better, then I think we can get this thing started. So that's basically all I got. I just wanted to speak to that. And love you all, and peace and blessings.